Tuesday, September 5th, 2018 will come to order. I'll entertain a motion to retire to executive session.
So moved.
Second. The motion is second. Call the roll, Ms. Rowe.
Mr. Smalls?
I vote yes.
Ms. Nicholas?
Yes.
Mr. DeWalt?
Yes.
Mr. Sidnor?
Yes.
Mr. Nutt?
Yes. Give that to him. All right, who do we need? Marty? Larry?
Nice. All right.
Who else? Is anybody else coming? Marty?
There we
Is that it?
Very nice.
Okay. Okay. Let the minutes show that we returned from executive session at 7:32, and we'll move to, we'll take things out a little bit out of order. We're going to move to the ordinance on cell towers, small cell towers. You have the floor, Marty.
Mr. President, this is an issue that staff has been working on for quite some time now. The technology that we're getting ready to discuss is, in the simplest form I know, is a replacement technology for wireless 4G. This is intended to support wireless 5G. And if you've driven around and looked up in most cities, you probably notice buildings adorned with all kinds of antennas. Those antennas were primarily in place to handle microwave and wireless transmissions, a lot of those in support of the existing 4G network. As I understand it, and I am the farthest from a technology expert in this field, as I understand it, the new technology is moving away from being mounted on the sides or roofs of tall structures like buildings, and we're looking at what have been labeled towers, utility poles, lamp posts, what have you. But the 4G technology is going to morph into technology that is supported more from poles and rights of ways and on private properties than at the ground, mounted at the ground level, than you will see mounted on buildings. So we have been discussing this because one of the primary routes for this technology is to utilize the city's rights of way. And this is a battle that cities across the country have been dealing with. We have had several starts, several stops, several false starts because of impending changes at the state and federal government. We have, because of the technology involved in this, it is a very intense technology. And because of the laws that govern these, especially the use of our rights of way, we have been dealing very heavily with our city solicitor as well as Joe Van Eaton here, who is with BBK. Is that? They are experts in the field of technology law. We have Joe with us this evening to present to you a PowerPoint presentation to help you wrap your arms around it. I took a look at this PowerPoint today, even though I've been at the forefront of the discussions for the city. I learned quite a bit from this PowerPoint as well. So Joe is here to present this to you and to take whatever questions you may have. The draft proposal, the draft ordinance, is basically what I consider to be on the foundation of it all, enabling legislation. This is basically confirming the fact that the city has the right to govern the use of our rights of way to some extent, and also to establish franchise agreements for the carriers of this technology to enjoy the use of our rights of way. So At this point in time, I can make no guarantees that the proposed legislation before you is not going to change in some manner, maybe even before the mayor and council meeting where it is introduced, and maybe even after it's adopted. This technology and the laws that are governing it are changing all of the time. Today, as we moved the final version of this along, we got notice from the National League of Cities that they had developed sample documents and opinions on this legislation that did not entirely mirror ours. So these are things that we're going to have to go back and take a look at. But the federal government, as I understand it, is getting ready to take some action. And because of that impending action, the general thought process is that we should have some legislation on the books before that happens. So that is for the most part our goal here. And with that, I'll ask Mr. Eaton to take the podium and go ahead with his presentation. Joe?
Good evening, everyone. We can bring up the presentation. I'm going to talk about the wireless facilities and the rights of way and give you some background as to why you do need to move forward with small cell legislation. But the most important reason was actually just mentioned, which is we received today, and so did everyone else, today the FCC released a draft order that will establish new rules regulating that will govern local consideration of applications for small cells. I haven't even had a chance to read it. The one big thing I saw was localities will have 60 days from the date an application is filed for placement of a small cell in the right-of-way on a utility pole to have all the hearings, all the analysis, everything done, any appeals done, and any local decision made. 60 days is not a lot of time. And it's certainly you're not going to be able to sort of create rules on the fly. So part of the goal here is to come up with a basic set of rules that will allow you to handle small cell applications in the right-of-way. So let me start by telling you what the industry looks like, who you might be getting applications from, and what they might be for, and what a small cell in the right-of-way might look like and why you might want to be concerned about it. So basically, we often think of the folks who are they're going to be putting up wireless facilities as companies like T-Mobile or Verizon Wireless, the people we buy cell phone service from. But there's actually an industry of people who build facilities that they then lease to those companies to provide service. So you can think of those almost as condo developers. They're folks who are almost in the real estate business. They're putting facilities in the rights of way. They then lease them to other people who put devices within their boxes to provide service. But you also have some other folks entering the market. Traditional cable providers, including Comcast. All of you will have seen Xfinity's advertisements for wireless service. Xfinity is now in the wireless business, and it's using devices that it installs on the wires that go outside your homes to provide 4G and Wi-Fi service, which is a different type of wireless service. And you're also seeing companies like Philips and Ericsson, who are in the lighting business, street lighting business, begin to sell smart street lights to cities. And those street lights include equipment that can be used to provide traditional cellular wireless service, but also a number of advanced services that will fall into what I'll talk about later as the Internet of Things. So you've got a lot of different people in the market who are interested in building facilities. Now, the market's going to not be one particular thing. What ends up happening is they layer different types of wireless facilities on top of one another. So you're still going to have macro cells, which are high-powered antennas. They're not going to go away. The antennas you could see around this area are going to be there. They're still going to be used to provide services. Then you're going to have small cells, which aren't really small in size necessarily. They cover a small area. And the whole goal of the reason you put a bunch of small cells in is because they work kind of like a honeycomb. The more cells there are, the more capacity you have within your network. That's because you're basically using the same frequencies over and over again. So you can see that in contrast to a macro cell, which will have a range of several miles, you'll see small cells having a maximum range of about 2 kilometers or less than a mile. And most of them actually are much smaller and have a range of about 750 feet, or radius of about 750 feet of service. And those can work together. You'll also hear of something called a distributed antenna system. And it's simplest to think of those as a different type of small cell. It's a type of small cell that's connected by fiber optics, and those are often run by companies like a Crown Castle or an Extenet, who have been very active in this area and lease capacity to other people. But all the wireless facilities have some things in common. They're going to have an antenna on them. That's one thing you look at. They're going to have radio units on them, which are the devices that actually generate the signals. They're going to have wiring up and down the poles. They may have backup power and batteries, and they're often going to have will require an electric meter because they have to be powered. Okay, so there's multiple components, and often there's then a line or a fiber optic line that goes to the facility and allows the signal to go from one point to another. When we talk about wireless, there's no such thing as a truly wireless system out there. All the wireless networks connect to wires, which then carry the signals back to a different location. So when we're talking about wireless deployment, we're talking about wireline elements, we're talking about boxes on poles that hold radio units, potentially backup power, and all those raise different concerns from a use perspective and from a citizen's perspective. And you're going to see more of them. That's the dramatic thing. Now, one thing that I think is, this is a piece I know is very difficult to read from where you're sitting, but what we're talking about is millions and millions of cells being deployed. Some of them small, some of them very large. And I've got an example of some of those facilities that are going to be installed. You're going to see here 4 different types of facilities, or 3 different types of facilities on this. The one on the far left is a facility that's put on top of a utility pole. The antenna is that white thing, very small, sticking up. If you look very closely, you can actually see a small box on the pole. So that's in a residential neighborhood. I think for a lot of folks that would actually not create too many issues. The next picture right in the center, that's in the residential area neighborhood in Los Angeles. The small cell in that facility is that large structure at the very top. You see that it looks like there's a whole bunch. It looks familiar for those of you who've seen them on buildings. It's very familiar to what those are. They're fairly large. They're about 4 feet long, and they're stacked along that area. The pole has these large risers that are actually separate from the pole that stick out, and there's a warning sign at about the 4-foot level that says don't come any closer because the radiation is dangerous at that level. So you're looking at that, and if I was in a neighborhood, I would be concerned about that facility. Okay, that's a very different type of facility. The third facility is a Wi-Fi facility installed by a cable operator. You can see that's put on a strand. It's less than a cubic foot. And you can see that that has even less of an intrusion. There's nothing else to it. There's no meters, nothing else. That's all that's involved with that type of wireless facility. So this is an example from San Francisco of an actual installation. I didn't do this slide. This was done by one of the staff members in San Francisco who follows this issue closely. On the left is a street light that's being modified in San Francisco to handle Wi-Fi, to handle wireless. And you can see where it's sort of different from other poles, but it's really not dramatically different. It doesn't have a lot of facilities or boxes on it. The one on the right is also a small cell facility. And again, the one on the left might not create too many problems. The one on the right, which has box after box after box after box on top of it and is fairly large, would be quite intrusive in a residential neighborhood and close to households. So you can see we've got a lot of different varieties. This is another shot of those pictures. I don't think you can see the double picture on the right, but that's a utility pole that has two antennas on top of it. Again, it's not that dramatically different from what you'd see. Everything's very high up. That particular one has no box, no meter associated with it because the wireless provider got the electric company to agree to not meter it, to give it a flat rate. So what we expect to see, is that what I just showed you is sort of the tip of the iceberg. This is a plan for a light pole, a future light pole or a smart light pole that includes all kinds of wireless. It includes traditional cell phone wireless, but it also includes Wi-Fi for public communication. It includes an electronic signage. So instead of hanging a banner, you actually have a permanent structure that you can change on the fly that has messages that goes out on it. It has something called RFID. For those of you who ski or who gone into hotels and seen the little cards that have chips in them that you use to enter your room, RFID is radio frequency identification, and it's being used in rights-of-way to do things like track where facilities are in the rights-of-way. Where are the manhole covers in place? Are things like that still in place? That's sort of a future technology that's going to be used for right-of-way management and make the job of your right-of-way public works staff simpler by sort of being able to identify what everything is in the rights-of-way, so when an emergency comes, you know who's responsible for it. If a pothole is created because somebody didn't restore it properly, you can tell what facility caused the problem by putting in little RFID chips and then monitoring them. So we're seeing a dramatic increase in wireless, and I tell you that because you have a reason to be concerned, but there's also a great deal of opportunity coming. And the question is how you regulate in a way that protects against the harm, but allows for the technology to move forward. And this will all fit into something called 5G and the Internet of Things. And what 5G is going to do is increase the speed and capacity of our cell phones. 4G is not going to go away, just like if you walk around, you'll notice occasionally on your telephone, you'll still see 3G. Sometimes you'll have 1 bar, sometimes you'll have 0 bars. These technologies overlap and they work together. And what 5G does is allow you to use frequencies very efficiently for high speed and for very rapid communications that will be very important in public safety applications. And the Internet of Things is when we talk about devices communicating with each other. The one that's talked about most frequently, although it's probably actually a long way off, is autonomous vehicles, where the vehicles actually talk to one another so they know to avoid each other, and they don't scream at each other during rush hour. They just manage to avoid each other and move along efficiently. So all these networks require sort of ubiquitous placement, and that's why we're talking about thousands and thousands of radio-based devices going into the rights-of-way over the next few years. And you're going to be limited by several federal laws and associated regulations. I won't go into the detail now, but basically the goal of the current FCC would limit not only your control over the rights-of-way and your ability to control what technologies go into particular neighborhoods, but would also put strict time limits on what you can do, on how long you have to act on an application, and would also limit what you can charge for access to the rights-of-way and what you can charge for permits. That's what they're purporting to do right now in an order that they expect to adopt by the end of this month. So in this sort of environment where we've got a process that may involve a large number of applications, where we have a real serious interest in protecting the community against unsightly facilities or facilities that are inappropriate for the neighborhoods, you certainly don't want a lot of towers going up in your rights-of-way. I know all the communities in this area had one company come in and propose to put 120-foot towers in the rights-of-way, which is an untenable proposition from both the safety perspective, but also from a shared use perspective. The idea is to come up with a process that protects against that, rewards people who are willing to work with you, and come up with designs that make sense for your community and that respects the underground neighborhood versus the overhead neighborhoods, works with you on figuring out what can go in quickly, and that evolves as federal and state regulations evolves. So one of the problems what we've got in this ordinance is basically addresses only right-of-way installations, and it's only part of a process. You already have laws in place here that require anyone who wants to put physical facilities in the rights-of-way to obtain a franchise from you. So that would be your cable operators, your telephone company, anyone who wants to put it in has to get a franchise from you. And that would include anyone who wants to put a wireless facility in the right-of-way. So besides the franchise, however, you have to decide on an individualized basis whether what's proposed at particular locations makes sense. What's appropriate for your historic district is obviously, and what's proposed for your commercial districts and what's appropriate for residential neighborhoods is going to be very different. So the idea is to come up with a model that develops a public process that can be managed by the city administrator and allows them to timely act on the wireless applications. And to that end, it sets some basic standards, but it doesn't go into granular detail. And it doesn't go into granular detail about how high it can be or how this is, because you have such rapid change going on in this area and such a big federal overlay that it probably makes sense to have some general standards and then develop detailed regulations at the staff level that can be used in applying, in determining what should go where. So what the approach that's reflected in the draft is that it has an empowerment clause that empowers the city manager to develop applications, forms, and detailed regulations. It provides that approvals will not be granted for some types of installations absent a showing that the law compels you to do it. And the idea is to identify certain areas that are going to be more dramatically affected by placement of wireless facilities than others. So, for example, we don't want towers in the rights-of-way. Having wireless facilities on the utility poles, as you saw in the pictures, is one thing. And we want them to meet certain design standards, but you don't want a lot of new facilities, new structures in the rights-of-way. Everybody knows every pole in the right-of-way is something somebody hits at some time. And so our goal is to have as few of those as possible. We want to make sure facilities in the historic district fit in with the historic district. We want to make sure that every corridor something's located in, the design of what goes in that corridor makes sense for that corridor. As I drove around this evening, I see some places with no utility poles above ground, some with very large utility poles above ground, and the idea is to make sure we have designs that fit each group, and we're not putting new burdens as far as we can avoid it on any neighborhood. And then it also creates some exemptions, because if we imagine thousands of applications coming in, not perhaps in this community, but imagine a lot of community, you don't want to be looking at everything that's wireless. As I sort of indicated, you're going to have thousands of things that are wireless. You already have little things developing, like, I don't know if in your neighborhood, but in my neighborhood we have dockless scooters that are now showing up in all of our residential neighborhoods in Arlington. And those are wireless devices. They work based on a connection to, on a Bluetooth connection that requires them to verify certain information. We're not so much concerned about regulating that type of wireless facility. So you have a 1 cubic foot exemption for facilities that are very small. If there's something in place and you're not actually changing the way it looks or the size or increasing the footprint, you don't have to come in and get a permit for that, but you do have to get a permit for other types of modifications. And we also exempt property that you own or control, because those will be subject to contract, and the contract will specify exactly what can go on that pole and what can't go on that pole. You can protect the interest through contract. It requires every facility, however, to meet FCC RF standards, or radio frequency standards. And those are a matter of enormous concern as I go around the country and talk to various communities from many community members, because the FCC's radio frequency emission standards are out of date. They haven't been updated in about 2 decades. But federal law is very clear that localities can't make decisions as to whether to grant or deny an application based on concerns about RF radiation. So the goal of the ordinance is to make sure they comply with the law as far as we can, but because of the effect of federal law, to go no further. So that's basically the direction. There, again, the reason we're doing this is we can envision an explosion of wireless facilities in the rights of way. It's coming, and it's almost difficult to imagine it stopping. It's a tide. On the other hand, you do have the right to control the design and the placement in a way that can avoid the effects that are most deleterious to the community. And the idea is to put an ordinance in place that will allow you to do that and to evolve your approach over time without having to go back and continually rewrite the ordinance. So it's an ordinance that sets a base set of standards and then turns the rest over to a regulatory system where we can devise standards and forms and applications, and those can be changed quickly as the law changes. With that, I'll pause, and if there are any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
On the RF standards, can a municipality require them to do studies and make sure that they submit those? How far can we go? That's going to be the issue in the communities.
That is a bit of an open question. But what I've seen, what is done as part of an application process, is to require a study as part of at least as part of the initial application process.
And even from the Fed side, you don't think that's an issue?
I don't think from the Fed side that's an issue right now.
Thank you.
Joe, let me just, the 60 days starts from the adoption of the rule, correct?
Well, we'll see what the FCC literally does.
Typically, it's from the adoption of a rule.
It usually is from the adoption, from the publication in the Federal Register, which can occur like 30 days later.
They got an open comment period right now?
They've got an open comment. Well, right now, the comment period is formally closed, but you actually have until the 17th of this month to comment on the draft order.
Okay. So let me just talk about the RF. I think that when they finally publish the results of the study done in Cuba, people are going to go through the ceiling with this thing, because they're going to find out that, in fact, those were microwaves down there that hurt those people. It's sort of under that whole thing is sort of under the radar right now. But that's what the latest thought is, and I'm not an expert in that area, but that's what impacted those people. And I think the residents, are going to go through the ceiling on this thing. Now, that said, especially when you see a sign that says stay away from this, I'll just say that. On the other hand, if I were Tesla and live today, I'd say, I told you so. Because this is what Tesla talked about 100 years ago. That, everything was going to go through the air. And I think that we need to adopt this as quickly as possible. Get something on the books. It may not be 100% correct. We can always correct it later on. Is that your thought? We get something on the books as soon as possible?
Your thought, right. If I think that the FCC, and even if it doesn't happen 30 days from now, even if it isn't adopted on the 26th, if I assume this goes into effect sometime by the end of October, I think that tells you've got a very short time frame to put something on the books that gives you a framework for moving forward and for making decisions if the applications start coming in the door. It may be that they won't come in the door in this community. There may be other communities that are bigger targets, but you want to be prepared, because you don't want to end up with surprise applications that the staff doesn't know how to deal with, and that have to be resolved in 60 days.
We've got a congested community here in 4 square miles. We've got 30,000 people living in 4 square miles. So I think these congested communities that we're going to see, they're going to jump in and say, hold it a minute, we can do this better than the current, the dishes or whatever the hell they're using. Okay. Fred, you have any questions?
No, I don't.
Okay. Carl?
No.
Okay. Keith?
No questions.
Jeez.
No questions.
Mr. President, let me just to make
Comment, if you
a
want.
comment. This topic was brought up, as you mentioned, Joe, in your opening, that it's being talked about and discussed. Maryland Municipal League early this summer had this as one of their topics, and it was encouraged then that municipalities try to get as much out in front of this as possible. And I know I've had discussions with our IT as well as our city administrator and the mayor, who have been working this for some time. So it's certainly been on the city's radar for some time. So I'm glad to see that there's at least something before us for us to start actually moving forward with.
Yeah, and the citizens. I'm sure you know that citizens may not realize that Laurel's actually been involved at the FCC with other Maryland communities in trying to convince the FCC that they should preserve local control over these facilities. So you've been at the forefront of working on this to try to come up with something that protects the community and
Protects the people.
Exactly.
Right. Okay. Anything else? Marty, do you have anything else?
No, sir.
Okay, so if the council has no objections, we'll introduce this at the meeting on Monday. It'll be introduced on Monday.
Thank you very much.
And we may come back as
Yeah, we may revise it.
there might be some changes.
Yeah, we understand that.
We'll be working, since we just saw this draft order today, we'll be working to make
Right.
sure that
Great.
what's proposed before you sort of is not completely blown
Let's
out
get
of the
something.
water.
I think I agree with you. We need to get something on the books as quickly as possible.
Let me ask
Mayor?
one question, Joe, since you're our expert, right? You're our expert. You, for a franchise agreement, do we have to say, I looked at our franchise agreement in the code today. What it doesn't say is a reference telecommunications or wireless, but there's a catch-all clause in there.
Yep.
Are you running into other municipalities or counties where you're changing the language within the code for franchise agreement?
In some communities we are, but that's actually typically where the reverse is true, where they, instead of having a catch-all clause, it says the electric company has to get a franchise, the
It does
telephone company has to get a
states a lot of
franchise.
utilities
Yeah.
and cables, but we haven't kept up with all the new technology, and that's what I was concerned about, that it doesn't reference that. And I was going to ask Marty and Larry to take a look at that, because we may have to do something quickly on that as well.
We did talk about that, though. We worked together on that, and the
Okay.
catch-all clause, to me, is broad enough to capture all these facilities, because it doesn't really allow anyone to be in the right-of-way without your permission.
I would have been at your meeting. The first one, I couldn't take any more of it, so I had to cancel the second.
Me either.
So we're good to go Monday night.
Thank you.
Marty?
Thank you, Mr. President.
All right, we'll move to, let's move to bid recommendations. Start out with the refuse truck. Who's presenting? Oh, here we go. You have the floor.
Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
Department of Public Works is recommending the purchase of a 125 cubic yard refuse truck, and it's provided for in the FY 2019 CIP fleet replacement, and the cost of the refuse truck is $174,802.80. Yeah, that's the refuse truck. I don't know if there's any question on that.
Any questions? Yeah, one question. This is a 25-yard truck. We're replacing a 25-yard truck.
Yes, sir.
Okay, what happens to the old truck?
The old truck, since we can't find replacement parts, so they will all be probably scrapped because again, the truck is so old it can no longer pass inspection, and the mechanic cannot find replacement part for it.
So it'll be sold as surplus, I assume?
Yeah, it's something like that.
Okay.
They don't have any resale value, so
Yeah, I understand, but somebody might buy it for parts.
possible.
We need an auction. Okay. Any other question? Any questions on this issue for the refuse truck? But it does not increase the fleet. That's the important aspect.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, we'll move to number 2. The DPW stake body truck.
Again, the stake body truck is with a lift gate for the Department of Public Works. Once again, it will not increase the fleet. And the funding for the purchase of vehicle is provided for in the CIP replacement program. And the cost for that one Ford F-50 truck is $61,351.
Okay, and then the same question. I assume that we're surplusing one truck. Is that correct?
It is, yes. Because again, it's the 1990 and the mechanic cannot find replacement part for that also. So,
All right.
like you're trying to say, it's scrapped.
Questions? All right. Move to number 3, paint machine, cab, and chassis.
The department once again is recommending purchase of this 2018 Chevrolet cab and chassis to permanently mount the newly purchased paint machine for the department, and the purchase will now increase the fleet and was included in the fleet replacement line item for the paint machine in FY 2018. And the funding for that purchase is provided for with CIP 2018 to 2023 FL7 funds. And the cost for this one Chevrolet Isuzu cab and chassis is $35,650.87.
Do we currently have a truck with a paint machine on it?
Yes, we do, but we have to keep taking it off and put it back. This one is going to be a dedicated truck for that paint machine, so we don't need to be taking it off and putting it back. And the old paint machine needed to be installed and taken off of one of the stake body factors. So this one is going to be a permanent feature, and we can always continue to use it.
Okay, so in this case, we're actually increasing the fleet by 1.
Yeah.
Correct?
Yes.
Okay. And I'll note that all 3 of these acquisitions are off contracts, and I assume that Larry has looked at these to make sure they meet all the criteria. Okay. Any questions on this item? All right, let me just, okay, so these will be on the agenda for approval on Monday night. And now let's move to the employee benefit, health, and dental insurance.
Thank you very much.
You have the floor.
Good evening, Mr. President, Council, Mayor. This year we went out to bid with the Meltzer Group for the city for the health and dental insurance. We come back with a bid of an increase of 4% of who we currently have is Cigna for our health insurance, and a 3.3 increase for our dental insurance, which is through Aetna. And there was no increase for the vision for this year because we're on a 3-year contract with them. So I recommend to the council that we keep our current provider for another year from November 1st, 2018 to October 31st, 2019.
All right. Questions?
I have a question, please. Is there a possibility I could get when you come out with the cost for the retirees, could I get a copy of that, please? To
Absolutely.
see what it is.
Yeah, absolutely.
Could I have last year's too and this year's?
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
Absolutely.
Carl, let me clarify that, because I've asked the question today in a memo to the city administrator. Does the $500 stipend that goes to retirees cover the retirees' participation in the plan for themselves?
It doesn't cover it all.
It does not cover it all?
Right, because I do have a quote for this year's for a single. It is 800 and where's my? Let me get my sheet and I'll quote it for you. It's for an individual, for a single individual. It's $829.26 a month.
Okay.
Okay, and then the stipend is $500.
Okay. So we'll get some clarification on that from the administration. Okay. That answer your question, Carl? Yes. Okay, good. Any other questions of on the health and dental and vision insurance?
I want to make a comment.
Mayor, go ahead.
I just want to at least thank Lisa publicly. Cigna came in with a rate increase of 8% originally, and you all
Yes.
negotiated, worked, and then
Yes.
got it down to 4%. So I just wanted to acknowledge that and thank you all for the work that you did.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. So, Lisa, if you go ahead and answer that question, get a response, just so we can see the real numbers, okay? The exact numbers.
Absolutely.
And then this will be on the agenda for consideration on Monday night.
Okay. Okay.
Okay.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. All right, so let's move to ordinance number 1931, text amendment 250. Whoa, hold on. If I got that right, Tim? Okay, go ahead.
Good evening. The proposed text amendment number 250, ordinance number 1931, is to allow a house of worship as a permitted by right use within the following zoning districts: commercial neighborhood zoning district, community commercial zoning district, commercial general zoning district, commercial shopping center zoning district, commercial village zoning district, commercial village activity center zoning district, office building zoning district, industrial commercial service zoning district, and the mixed-use transportation-oriented zoning district. Currently, the code allows a house of worship via special exception in portions within those zoning districts. Staff wishes to amend this use within these zoning districts in order to bring them in line with simpler assembly uses. Thank you.
And just to note that this does not relinquish any of the other requirements for a use in these districts, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Questions? Valerie? Good for introduction on Monday night? Heath? Thank you, Carl.
No questions.
Okay, so this will be introduced on Monday night, first reading. We'll move to ordinance, the draft ordinance from Mr. Sidnor to amend the election laws. Mr. Sidnor, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. I just want to bring some things in context. I'm going to read something for you that I prepared for tonight. Good evening again, once everybody out. One of our fundamental rights as United States citizens is the choice to choose our elected officials. The process should be made to encourage all citizens to participate and be active in all levels of government. There has been several amendment changes to the United States Constitution that encompass all American citizens, regardless of race, sex, color, education level, whether you're on property or not, to vote. The United States is constantly changing, and each state has the authority to change the voting process as long as it's not in violation of the United States Constitution. Our great state of Maryland allows municipalities to amend the city charter to lower the voting age to 16 and 17-year-olds to vote in local elections with a majority vote from the city council. Tacoma Park, Maryland, Hyattsville, Maryland, and Greenbelt, Maryland passed legislation to allow 16 and 17-year-olds to vote in their local elections. Some are raised a question about the competence of a 16-year-old and 17-year-old to make informed choices in a voting booth. Aren't young people notoriously impulsive, hot-headed, and their brain not fully developed enough to make good judgment? Research from Lawrence Steinsberg, professor of psychology at Temple University and the author of 2 books, The Age of Opportunity and The Lessons from New Science Adolescence, He said yes and no. When considering the intellectual capacity of a teenager, it is important to distinguish between what psychologists call cold and hot cognition. Cold cognitive abilities are those we use when we are in a calm situation. We are by ourselves, have time to deliberate, and when the most important skill is the ability to reason logically with facts. An example of cold cognition would be concentrating on evidence before drawing a conclusion. Voting is a good example of this sort of a situation. Studies from cold cognition have shown that skills necessary to make informed decisions are firmly in place by 16. By that age, 16 and 17-year-olds can gather, process information, weigh the pros and cons, and reason logically with facts, and take time before making a decision. 16 and 17-year-olds may sometimes make bad choices, but they do not make them any oftener than adults do. Hot cognitive abilities are those we rely on to make good judgment, make good decisions when we are emotionally aroused, in groups or in a hurry. If you're making a decision when angry or exhausted, the most critical skill is self-regulation, which enables you to control your emotions, withstand pressure from others, resist temptation, check your impulse. Unlike cold cognitive ability, self-regulation does not mature until about age 22, research has shown. This psychological evidence is backed up by neuroscientific findings. Neuroimaging studies shows that the brain system necessary for cold cognitions are mature by mid-adolescent, while those of self-regulation are not fully developed until a person's early 20s. In addition to scientific case for lowering the voting age, there's also a civic argument. Consider a dozen or so countries like Argentina, Austria, Brazil, Nicaragua, Germany, Norway, Scotland, Sudan, Siberia, Indonesia allow people to vote at 16s in national, state, or local elections. In such countries, voter turnout among 16 and 17-year-olds is significantly higher than those among young adults. Allow young people to begin voting at age which increase more likely to vote may increase future turnouts at all ages. In closing, let's give 17-year-olds more than just their voice to make a change. Allow 17-year-olds to cast a ballot in the seat of Laurel local election. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Keith. Two parts to this. That's the first part. Second part is you wanted same-day registration.
Yes. Like I mentioned, Mr. President, we'll make this process more easy for everybody. And some counties in our state of Maryland allow you to vote the same day. So voting should be, like I said, a constitutional right. And we want to make it easier for people to vote, to participate in this process. So that's the second part of it, Mr. President.
All right,
allow 17-year-olds to vote and allow people to register and vote the same day on election day, up to election day.
Okay, just to clarify, they can vote on the same day now with the provisional vote. Is that correct, Ms. Rao? Okay. Discussion. Comment.
Mr. Smalls. Mr. Sidnor.
Yes, sir.
In the proposed ordinance, where it talks about one of the whereas is the state of Maryland already allows 16-year-olds to register to vote and allows registered 17-year-olds to vote in primary elections if they will be 18 at the time. I don't see anything in this, and I'm just trying to gather as much information and understanding about this as I can. Are we talking 16-year-olds, someone that just turned 16 a month before Election Day could register to vote, or just turned 17, I'm sorry, a day or two before election and same day registration could essentially vote? Again, I'm just trying, where it says here, if someone is 17 and will be 18 by the time the election occurs, that falls into the system and allowed or legal voting age. I'm just trying to get a sense.
Now, I understand what you're saying, Mr.
Yeah.
Smalls. I think that piece right there, what I'm proposing is that at 17 years old, you can vote. I was just referenced that. The reason I'm asking 17 years to vote, because you can vote in the primary election now, as long as you're 18 before the general election. So I'm saying if that vote can count, if you can cast a vote in the primary election at 17, then let's go ahead and lower the voting age to 17 and vote in all elections throughout and register the same day. If you're 17, and you can register that same day and cast a ballot that same day. So that's what I'm saying. Because we already got something provision in place already that at 17 you can vote, but it's only in the primary. So if you can, that vote can count towards the primary. So why not change it now to 17 vote in general elections and all primaries? Does that clear anything up for you, Mr. Small?
It does, but I do have a follow-up.
Sure.
With the municipalities that you mentioned, Greenbelt, Hyattsville, Tacoma Park, is there any data that you may be aware of that has shown either how many 16, 17-year-olds have registered to vote or 16, 17-year-olds who have actually voted, if it's made a difference in turnout?
I don't have any data, Mr. Smalls, on that though, but it's the same as being 18. We don't, it's like, let's allow them to vote. The state passed that constitution. Hey, you can vote at 17. So they have a choice. So if someone wants to come out at 17 and vote, that's their choice. Like right now, if you're 18, you can vote. So you want to come out and vote at 18. So throughout the world, they showed higher turnout. So the United States is supposed to set the example of other countries moving ahead of us. So we need to move along with them.
Okay. Thank you.
Just to clarify, the 17, 18-year-old rule is for partisan elections, essentially.
Correct.
Correct? So that they can vote in the primary in a partisan election, which we're not. We're nonpartisan here. If they're 18 by the general election.
Right. Yeah, we're talking about the local election, the mayor and the city council race only.
Yeah. Any other discussion? I think, Mr. Sidner, this has merit, but I think it requires some additional analysis. I think Mr. Smalls has pointed out, I'd like to see how this has increased elections in the United States. I've stood down in Central America and watched them vote. And haven't been the other places, haven't been Siberia or Russia. But I have seen them vote in Central America, and you're right, the turnout's much, much higher. But the turnout's much, much higher in Central America. And I didn't see the youth voting in those elections when I was down in Central and South America. What I saw was adults, because they have a yearning to vote. They want to say what's going on in their government. They get more adamant about it. I know that many years ago, Mr. Hoyer and another candidate went to the two high schools locally and addressed the students, trying to get some interest in those seniors that were 17 years old to vote. And a couple of them actually worked for Mr. Hogan. This is a long time ago when he lost his first election, and Steny Hoyer. But they haven't come back. And again, I think you and I had this discussion. I'm really concerned about the ability to understand, and I hear what you're saying, the issues, because they don't get the same amount of civics and government in the high schools that we used to get. I mean, that's been my observation. And again, I think it requires some additional analysis, and I think unless my council members, want you to move forward with this, I would suggest we need some additional analysis. And
I have a follow-up, though, Mr. President. I have some analysis from 18 to 24 years old was the lowest voter turnout rate in United States history.
Oh, I understand that. I believe so that's why I understand the turnout is very poor in this country.
Yeah. And that's why I think we should push them to be lower the voting age to 17 and get them more involved in the process at early age. Research also said that if they vote throughout the world, when they vote early, they have a vote higher turnout, a lifetime habit of voting. So, I see that you're going at with that, but the same thing, if you're 18, you can vote. So 17, regardless, in my opinion, I think that once the state allows you to do something, it's your choice to do it. I don't think the data is really, that's the law. The law said we can do something. Why would we distinguish that? What's the percentage of people who do something? That's how I see it.
Okay. What's the pleasure of the council on this? Require additional analysis, or should we move forward with it?
I'll make a motion that we move forward with it till Monday.
Mr. Smalls?
I need to study this a little more, Mr. President, in all fairness to not just Mr. Sidnor and the draft, but just for my own information and education on this. I'd like to just hold off for a bit, and not only that, I think we all know that the mayor has been working on election modifications to our election laws as well, and perhaps finding ways to tie in what the mayor has been working on along with what Mr. Sidnor is recommending here. I think may end up giving us, some pretty solid results when it comes to getting additional turnout, which I certainly applaud and support Mr. Sidnor's efforts to find ways to get higher turnouts at our elections. I just need, for me personally, I need a bit more information gathering.
Thank you, Mr. Smalls. Valerie?
Well, I know the Greenbelt, Hyattsville, and Tacoma have passed this. And just in all fairness, I'd just like to see a little bit more information first.
Okay. I think what I've heard, Mr. Sidnor, is that Keith, that I'd like to see some statistics from those three jurisdictions on how it's impacted their turnout. I applaud trying to increase participation. I've been told by many voters in Laurel that things are okay, so why would we come out and vote? That's been a problem. And so I think at this point, we need to do some additional analysis and then bring it back to the council again, Keith.
Majority's work speaks. I'm fine with that.
All right. And again, I don't know. I understand what we're trying to accomplish, increase participation. I'm not so sure that's where to look to increase participation, because I'm not so sure we have a large number in that age category residing within the city. I go to the high schools, and most of those children don't even reside in the city. But again, I think the goal is admirable, and I think we need to do some additional research. Okay? Appreciate it, Keith. Okay, we'll move to resolution number 5-18, Education Advisory Committee. Lou?
Thank you, Mr. President, Mayor, and City Council members. Resolution 5-18 would establish an Education Advisory Committee to help strengthen the relationship between the city, Prince George's County Board of Education, and our local schools. And the other educational organizations are in and around the city that provide services and support to students in Laurel and the greater Laurel area. I won't read the ordinance. It's all pretty self-explanatory. The purpose, duty, and meeting requirements are all enumerated within the resolutions. The membership would consist of a majority of city residents, but may also include non-city residents because of our relationship with all of our area schools and PTAs.
Questions? Discussion? Comment? Are we prepared to introduce this resolution at the meeting Monday night, Fred?
Yes.
Thank you. Valerie?
Yes.
Keith?
Yes, Mr. President.
Thank you. Appreciate that, Carl.
Yes.
Okay, we'll introduce this Monday night. Is there anything else coming before the council? Meeting's adjourned at 8:32. Your mic's on. Yeah, this is. Well, yeah, you need to be careful with that.